An ancient philosopher described a lost city of perfect rings, a story that has haunted us for millennia. That story is the legend of Atlantis. Today, a stunning formation in the Sahara Desert matches that ancient description with eerie precision. By the end of this exploration, you will have the evidence to decide for yourself if a myth could be rooted in a real, breathtaking place. We will confront a timeless riddle where the lines between a natural wonder and a sunken kingdom blur completely. What does it mean for a civilization to be lost, not to the sea, but to the sands of time? The story begins in the soft light of an Athenian courtyard, with a philosopher sharing a tale not of his own making. Plato, in his dialogues Timaeus and Critias, recounted a history he insisted was true, a story preserved for generations by Egyptian priests and brought to Greece by the lawgiver Solon. This was not presented as mere legend, but as a forgotten chapter of human history. The civilization he described was called Atlantis, a formidable island nation situated beyond the Pillars of Hercules, what we know today as the Strait of Gibraltar. It was a place of immense power and sophistication, blessed with abundant resources from the earth itself. At its heart stood a magnificent capital, built upon a hill and encircled by alternating rings of land and water, a perfect geometric marvel of engineering and design. The people of Atlantis, according to the account, initially lived in harmony with virtue and each other, but over time their human nature succumbed to pride and greed. They grew corrupt, launching campaigns to conquer the ancient world. It was then, Plato writes, that the gods judged them. In one terrible day and night of earthquakes and floods, the entire island was swallowed by the sea, vanishing forever beneath the waves. This vivid, specific narrative, complete with descriptions of architecture, geography, and even social structure, has echoed for over 2,000 years. It is a story of hubris and downfall, yes, but it is also a remarkably detailed blueprint. This level of detail is what transforms it from a simple moral fable into a tantalizing historical puzzle. If we are to take Plato seriously, even partially, then we are not looking for a vague mythical island. We are searching for a very real place that matches a very specific set of clues. The question that has haunted explorers and scholars ever since is straightforward yet profound. Could such a detailed account be entirely fictional, or was Plato preserving, through layers of time and translation, a distorted memory of a place that truly existed? This single question ignites the search and brings our focus to a remote, silent expanse of the Sahara. Plato gave us our first and most crucial landmark, the Pillars of Hercules. To an ancient Greek, this was not merely a strait but the very edge of the known world. Beyond those towering cliffs lay the vast, mysterious ocean of Atlas, a realm of monsters and legends. It is here, Plato insists, just beyond this threshold, that the great island of Atlantis once rose from the sea. He describes it as larger than Libya and Asia combined, a statement that has puzzled scholars for centuries, as it suggests a landmass of impossible continental scale. This is our starting point on the map, and it immediately presents a stark challenge. The Richat structure sits firmly in Mauritania, over 400 kilometers from the Atlantic coast, deep within the arid embrace of the Sahara Desert. On the surface, this seems like a definitive contradiction. How can an inland geological formation possibly be the island capital described beyond the Pillars? This is where the debate truly ignites, forcing us to question not just a location, but the very nature of ancient storytelling and environmental history. Proponents of the Richat theory propose a fascinating reinterpretation. They suggest that the phrase "beyond the Pillars" might not have been a precise nautical coordinate, but a broader term for lands lying to the west of the Mediterranean world, accessible via the Atlantic. Could the story, passed down over generations and through different cultures, have transformed a distant inland empire into a mythical island in the sea? Furthermore, they point to a profound climatic truth. The Sahara was not always a desert. Between approximately 10,000 and 5,000 years ago, during what is called the African Humid Period, this region was a verdant landscape of grasslands, lakes, and rivers. What is today a forbidding sea of sand could have been a navigable, water-rich territory. A great city built on a rise near ancient waterways might, from the perspective of Mediterranean travelers hearing tales second or third hand, indeed be described as an island of civilization in a vast green expanse. The catastrophic end described by Plato, then, might not be a sudden sinking, but a slower, equally devastating disappearance under the advancing sands as the climate changed. Critics, however, hold firm to the literal text. For them, an island means an island surrounded by water. The Pillars of Hercules are a specific geographic feature, and Atlantis was a maritime power that launched a naval invasion. Placing it in the Sahara, they argue, requires too many interpretive leaps and directly contradicts the core elements of the story. This geographical hurdle becomes the first major battleground. Is Plato's account a precise historical document to be followed like a GPS coordinate, or is it a cultural memory, a kernel of truth wrapped in layers of myth and metaphorical language? The answer you lean toward here will shape everything that follows. It asks us to decide if we are searching for a literal sunken continent in the Atlantic, or for the ghost of a once great civilization that was lost not to the waves, but to the relentless drift of time and dust. This single point of contention stretches the very fabric of the legend, testing its ability to hold a real place within our world. From the vastness of space, the Richat structure reveals its true, breathtaking form. It is a colossal target etched into the earth, a series of near-perfect circles spanning nearly 50 kilometers across. This is not a subtle pattern, but a bold, undeniable geometric signature visible from orbit. When you place this satellite image beside the words written by Plato over 2 millennia ago, the connection becomes almost startling. He described the capital of Atlantis as built upon a hill, encircled by alternating rings of land and water. The philosopher wrote of a great circular canal, then a ring of land, then another water ring, and so on, creating a concentric fortress of engineering. Now look at the Richat. Its pattern is not one of water and land, but of light and dark, of resistant and soft rock. The rings are formed from bands of tough quartzite, which stand as ridges, and weaker sedimentary layers worn down into valleys. The visual parallel is so precise it feels intentional. Here, geology has drafted a blueprint that a civilization might have followed. The central dome of the structure could be that legendary hill, and the alternating ridges and troughs mirror the described rings with an uncanny faithfulness. This is the heart of the theory's persuasive power. It presents something you can see with your own eyes, a natural wonder that matches an ancient description down to its very shape. For those who believe there is a kernel of truth within the Atlantis myth, this is not merely a coincidence, it is a clue written in stone. Geologists, of course, have a clear and well-established explanation for how this marvel formed. They describe a process called symmetrical uplift, where a giant dome of rock was pushed upward from deep below the Earth's surface. Over millions of years, wind and water meticulously sanded down this dome, eroding the softer rock layers faster than the hard ones, carving out the concentric rings we see today. It is a masterpiece of natural erosion, a testament to the patient, sculpting power of time. There is no need for ancient architects in this scientific narrative. And yet, the question persists, lingering in the space between what we know and what we wonder. Could the people of a distant, humid past have encountered this formation when it was a lush, green rise, its valleys filled with water from a wetter climate? Might they have seen this perfect natural geometry and built their settlement within its ready-made defensive rings? The idea suggests that perhaps the legend did not invent the rings but inherited them. It proposes that a real, awe-inspiring place left such a profound impression on human memory that its image was preserved, transformed, and passed down through ages until it reached Plato's ears. This visual echo forces a fascinating choice. Do we see a remarkable but ultimately random alignment, where nature accidentally created the perfect symbol for a fictional city? Or do we see a natural landmark so distinctive that it became the anchor for a story, its real rings forever entwined with the legendary rings of Atlantis? The bullseye in the desert does not provide an answer, but it makes the question impossible to look away from. The dimensions given by Plato are precise and almost technical. He writes that the central island of the capital was 5 stadia across. The first ring of water surrounding it was 1 stadium wide, and the entire complex from the outermost ring to its opposite side measured 127 stadia. A stadium was an ancient Greek unit of length based on the length of a footrace track. Converting this is our first challenge, as the exact length of a stadium varied from place to place in antiquity. Most scholars agree on an average length of about 185 meters. Using that figure, the numbers become something tangible. The central island would be roughly 925 meters across. The first water ring would be 185 meters wide, and the entire city would span an astonishing 23.5 kilometers in diameter. Now pull up a satellite image of the Richat structure and lay these measurements over its rings. Some researchers who support the connection have done exactly this, and they report a compelling alignment. The central dome of the Richat, they suggest, matches the scale of Plato's central island. The distances between some of its major concentric ridges appear to correspond roughly to the described proportions of land and water rings. The overall diameter of the entire formation, at about 40 to 50 kilometers, is larger than Plato's figure, but for proponents, it is close enough to be intriguing, especially given the potential for error in ancient records or unit conversion. This numerical exercise feels like finding a key that almost fits a very old lock. It invites a moment of genuine wonder, a sense that perhaps we are not just looking at a similar shape, but at something built to a specific recorded plan. However, the scientific and archaeological communities urge extreme caution here. They point out several critical issues. First, the Richat's rings are not uniform or perfectly spaced like the idealized blueprint in Plato's story. They are the irregular result of differential erosion. Second, and more fundamentally, applying the precise measurements of a described city to a natural geological feature is a problematic endeavor. It is akin to measuring the rings of a tree and declaring they match the floor plan of a castle. The discrepancies are significant. Plato's 127 stadia translates to about 23.5 kilometers, but the Richat is more than twice that size. To make the numbers align, one must selectively interpret which rings count, or propose a different value for the stadium unit, which begins to feel like adjusting the evidence to fit the theory. This leads to a deeper philosophical question about Plato's text itself. Were these numbers intended as literal, surveyor-accurate data, or were they symbolic, meant to convey perfection, harmony, and grand scale within the framework of ancient Greek mathematics and philosophy? The number 5, for instance, held particular significance. The debate over scale, therefore, is not merely a mathematical puzzle. It is a debate about how we read ancient sources. Do we treat them as engineering documents, or as literary and philosophical works that use numbers to convey truth of a different kind? This meticulous scrutiny of stadia and kilometers may seem dry, but it strikes at the very heart of the mystery. It asks whether the similarity is a profound coincidence of nature, a cultural memory encoded with surprising accuracy, or simply a pattern we are irresistibly drawn to project a story upon. The tape measure, in this case, does not settle the argument, it deepens it. The undeniable visual match forces a confrontation with a different kind of truth. To understand what the Richat structure truly is, we must listen to the story told by the rocks themselves. The first formal geological studies of this remote region began in the middle of the 20th century, as aerial photography and later satellite imagery revealed its full, spectacular form. Scientists were not looking for lost cities, they were deciphering a planetary history book written in stone. What they pieced together is a narrative of immense force and almost unimaginable time. The consensus is clear and robust. The Richat structure is not a ruin but a deeply eroded geologic dome. More specifically, it is what is known as a symmetrical anticline. Imagine taking a layered cake and pressing upward on its center from below. The layers would arch into a gentle dome, with the oldest, deepest layers now exposed at the core. That is precisely what happened here on a titanic scale. Hundreds of millions of years ago, molten rock from the Earth's mantle began to push upward, creating a vast blister on the landscape. This dome, over eons, was subjected to the relentless forces of wind and water. The different rock layers, some hard like quartzite and others soft like sandstone, eroded at drastically different rates. The tough layers remained as ridges, the soft ones wore down into valleys, carving the stunning concentric rings we see from space. This is a process measured not in centuries, but in geologic epochs. The evidence for this natural origin is extensive and multifaceted. The rings are composed of distinct bands of igneous rock from that ancient uplift, sedimentary layers deposited over time, and metamorphic rock transformed by heat and pressure. Crucially, there is no sign of the shattered rock or melted material that would hallmark a meteorite impact, nor is there a volcanic crater or the telltale signs of lava flows from a central vent. Every physical clue points to a slow, majestic unveiling by erosion. For the vast majority of Earth scientists, the case is closed. The Richat is a breathtaking example of planetary geology, a natural sculpture that reveals the patient artistry of elemental forces. This scientific foundation is not a dismissal of mystery, but its essential grounding. It establishes the default, evidence-based reality of the site. Any proposal that human history is etched into these rings must first contend with this powerful and well-documented natural history. It asks a profound question of those who see Atlantis here. Are we looking at the footprint of a civilization, or have we, in our longing for lost worlds, simply projected a human story onto a masterpiece of natural art? The rocks have their own older tale to tell, one that begins long before the first human ever walked the earth. This brings us to the single greatest challenge, a wall built not of stone but of time itself. Plato was remarkably specific about when Atlantis fell. He placed its catastrophic end roughly 9,600 years before his own time, which situates it around 11,600 years ago, deep in our planet's prehistory. This date alone pushes the story into the realm of the seemingly impossible. Now hold that number in your mind and look again at the Richat. The rocks that form those majestic rings are not thousands, but hundreds of millions of years old. The process of uplift and the relentless erosion that carved its iconic shape unfolded across tens of millions of years. By the time the first complex human societies were forming, the Richat structure was already a timeless, ancient monument, its formation complete. The geological timeline and the historical one, at first glance, do not just disagree, they exist on entirely different scales. For the scientific perspective, this is often the definitive rebuttal. How could a civilization build a city upon a geological feature that finished forming eons before humanity itself? It appears to be an insurmountable contradiction, a clear signal that we are conflating a natural wonder with a human story. Yet, those who see a connection here propose several fascinating ways to bridge this chasm. The first possibility is that Plato's date is not a historical fact, but a symbolic or mistaken one. His story came to him through a chain of transmission from Egyptian priests to the Greek statesman Solon, and finally into his dialogues. Could a decimal point have been misplaced in translation, or a lunar cycle misinterpreted as a solar year? Perhaps the number 9,600 was not meant as a literal count of years, but as a philosophical device to convey immense, almost mythic antiquity, a time so distant it symbolized the dawn of human memory. Alternatively, there is the idea of a much later occupation. Imagine a culture, perhaps 6,000 or 7,000 years ago during the Sahara's green period, discovering this colossal, perfectly circular formation. Its natural rings, possibly filled with water from a wetter climate, would have provided a stunning, ready-made site for a settlement. This culture could have thrived there, developing a sophisticated society, only to vanish as the desert reclaimed the land. Over millennia, stories of this lost circular city in the West could have been passed down, growing grander with each telling, eventually reaching Egypt and then Greece, where Plato wove them into his philosophical narrative. In this version, the story is not about the formation of the rings, but about the people who later lived within them. The cataclysm described would then be the dramatic climate shift that turned a green Sahara into a desert, a process that to a displaced population would indeed feel like the world swallowing their home. This reframes the entire question. We are no longer looking for a civilization that built the rings, but for one that found them, inhabited them, and was ultimately separated from them by environmental change. The geological age of the structure becomes irrelevant. It is the human chapter that matters. This approach attempts to reconcile the immovable rock with the mutable story. It asks us to consider whether the true power of a place lies not in its creation, but in how it is remembered. The immense gulf of time, therefore, is not necessarily a dead end. It is a puzzle that forces us to decide what kind of story Plato was really telling. Was it a precise historical record, or a profound myth built upon a kernel of geographical truth? The silent, ancient rocks of the Richat hold their age as both a fact and a riddle. Plato described Atlantis as a land of abundance, a fertile paradise blessed with rivers and forests. For a structure now surrounded by endless sand, this seems like the ultimate contradiction. But the desert holds a secret, a memory of a different world entirely. Between approximately 10,000 and 5,000 years ago, the Sahara was not a desert at all. This era, known as the African humid period, transformed the entire region. Where dunes now stretched to the horizon, there were sprawling grasslands, shimmering lakes, and flowing rivers. The climate shift was driven by subtle changes in Earth's orbit, which brought more monsoon rains to North Africa. This was a land teeming with life, where giraffes, elephants, and hippos roamed and fish swam in vast inland waterways. The Richat structure in this context would not have been a barren geologic oddity. It would have risen as a prominent landmark within a vibrant, water-rich ecosystem. Its central dome could have been a forested hill, and its concentric valleys might have held springs or even captured rainfall, forming natural moats. This environmental context is not just a backdrop, it is the essential stage upon which the entire theory gains its plausibility. It answers the most basic question: how could a great civilization exist here? The answer is they would have thrived here in a green and generous world. Archaeology confirms that people did indeed call this green Sahara home. Across the wider region, from the caves of Tassili en-Najjar in Algeria to the plains of Libya, researchers have found a profound record of human presence. This evidence comes in the form of sophisticated stone tools, grinding stones for processing wild grains, and most evocatively, breathtaking rock art. These ancient galleries, painted and carved onto canyon walls, depict scenes of swimming, hunting, and herds of cattle, offering a direct window into a lost way of life. They show communities that were not merely surviving but flourishing, with complex social structures and rich cultural practices. While no major settlement has been discovered at the Richat itself, the undeniable fact of widespread Saharan occupation during this period makes a simple point: the area was habitable and indeed inhabited. It is entirely conceivable that the people of this era would have been drawn to a landmark as unique and imposing as the Richat. They might have used its clear, circular geometry for ceremonial purposes, or simply settled near its reliable water sources. Their stories, their identity, could have become intertwined with the place. This brings us to the most poignant layer of the mystery: the end of that green world. As Earth's orbital cycle slowly shifted again, the monsoon rains retreated southward. Over centuries, the lakes dried up, the rivers vanished, and the grasslands gave way to sand. What was once a paradise became an uninhabitable expanse. For the people who lived there, this was not a slow geological process. It was a cataclysm unfolding within generations. They would have witnessed their world dying around them, forcing a great dispersal, a migration to the Nile Valley, the Niger River, and beyond. This is where the legend finds a powerful, emotional resonance. The story of a magnificent place swallowed not by the sea, but by the desert, a paradise lost to a changing sky. It mirrors the universal human experience of displacement and memory. Could the tale of a splendid circular city, lost to a great disaster, be the distilled memory of that traumatic climate shift? The theory suggests that the Richat's true story may not be about its creation, but about its abandonment. It proposes that the rings themselves became a symbol, a mental landmark carried by displaced peoples, a story of home that was slowly wrapped in the grandeur of myth over thousands of years of oral tradition. The environmental catastrophe provides a tragic plausibility that feels deeply human, turning a geologic wonder into a potential monument to resilience and loss. The theories paint a vivid picture, but science demands something more solid, something you can hold in your hand. So what have we actually found on the ground at the Richat structure? The answer reveals a profound disconnect between the legend and the physical record. Archaeological surveys of the area have uncovered evidence of human presence, but it tells a story of deep time, not of a lost Bronze Age capital. Scattered across the landscape are stone tools, most notably what are known as Herculean hand axes. These are not the refined instruments of a metal-working civilization. They are ancient, multi-purpose tools crafted by our early human ancestors. Their design is iconic, a teardrop shape flaked on both sides, and they date back not thousands but hundreds of thousands of years. They speak of nomadic groups, of hunters and gatherers passing through a landscape that was, at various points in prehistory, far more hospitable. This is a crucial piece of context. People have indeed been in this area for an immense span of time, but their traces are those of transient occupation, not permanent, monumental settlement. The glaring absence is what speaks loudest. Despite extensive searching, no archaeologist has ever unearthed the foundations of a grand city within those rings. There are no shattered columns, no fragments of distinctive pottery, no slag heaps from metal smelting, and no burial mounds that would accompany a large, complex society. An advanced civilization like the one Plato describes leaves a massive and unmistakable footprint in the archaeological record. It leaves trash middens, building materials, tools, and artistic artifacts. At the Richat, that footprint is simply not there. Proponents of the Atlantis connection sometimes point to certain linear rock formations or depressions, suggesting they are the remains of walls or canals. To the trained eye of a geologist or archaeologist, however, these features bear all the hallmarks of natural processes. The relentless wind can carve straight lines, and the differential erosion of rock layers can create troughs that look, from a certain angle, suspiciously artificial. It is a classic case of pareidolia, the human tendency to see meaningful patterns, especially faces or structures, in random shapes. We are wired to find order, and in a place this visually striking, it is incredibly easy to see what we wish to see. This evidentiary gap is not a minor detail, it is the central pillar of the scientific skepticism. Archaeology operates on a principle of proof. A hypothesis, no matter how compelling or beautiful, must be supported by tangible, verifiable data. For the Richat to be Atlantis, we would expect to find a layer of cultural material corresponding to the right time period, filled with the complex artifacts of an advanced society. Instead, we find ancient hand axes and then a vast, silent emptiness until much more recent times. The lack of proof is, in itself, a powerful form of evidence. It strongly suggests that while the location was visited, it was never the heart of a sprawling, technologically sophisticated empire. This does not diminish the Richat's majesty, but it firmly places its wonder in the realm of geology and deep human history, rather than in a single, cataclysmic chapter of a lost civilization. The stones tell a story, but it is a slower, older, and ultimately different story than the one we might wish to hear. The search for Atlantis has never been limited to a single, remote desert. For centuries, scholars have offered competing interpretations of Plato's story, each with its own compelling logic. One of the most enduring perspectives is that Atlantis was never meant to be a real place at all. In this view, the dialogues of Timaeus and Critias are not history but philosophy. Plato, grappling with the nature of the ideal state and the corrupting influence of power, may have crafted the entire narrative as an elaborate allegory. The perfect rings, the abundant resources, and the dramatic downfall serve as a powerful metaphor for the cycle of civilization, a cautionary tale about the hubris that comes with greatness. This interpretation asks us to read the story not as a map, but as a mirror reflecting timeless truths about human nature and society. It is a compelling argument, for it explains why the details feel so vivid yet remain so elusive. The story's purpose was to teach, not to document. Another prominent theory, firmly rooted in the archaeological record, points to a cataclysm much closer to Plato's world. Around 3,600 years ago, the volcanic island of Thera, modern-day Santorini, erupted with unimaginable force. This was one of the largest volcanic events in human history, devastating the sophisticated Minoan civilization on nearby Crete. The eruption caused massive tsunamis, blanketed islands in ash, and likely led to widespread cultural collapse. To many historians, this real-world disaster, occurring in the Mediterranean and within the cultural memory of the ancient Greeks, is a far more plausible seed for the Atlantis legend. The story of an advanced island kingdom destroyed in a single day and night by fire and water could easily be a distorted, magnified memory of the Thera eruption, passed down over generations. Now place the Richat hypothesis alongside these established ideas. The allegorical theory is elegant and philosophically satisfying, but it does not address the startling, specific geographical match of the rings, a detail that feels oddly precise for a purely invented parable. The Thera theory is strong because it is anchored in a verified, catastrophic historical event that affected a known civilization. Yet, it struggles to account for Plato's explicit description of concentric rings and its location beyond the Pillars of Hercules, as Thera sits firmly inside the Aegean Sea. The Richat proposal flips the script. It offers a breathtaking visual match to the central city's description and a potential environmental cataclysm in the desertification of the Sahara. But it falters on the complete absence of archaeological evidence for an advanced society at the site itself. It also requires us to stretch the meaning of Plato's geography and chronology in significant ways. This contextualization is crucial. It reveals that the Richat is not the only candidate, but perhaps the most visually arresting one in a long-standing debate. It enters a field where the leading theories are built on philosophical analysis or Mediterranean archaeology. The Richat hypothesis asks us to look much farther afield, both in distance and in imagination, proposing that the core of the legend might be a memory from a different continent and a different, much older ecological disaster. Its strength is its undeniable, iconic shape, a natural formation that mirrors the legend's central image with an almost supernatural fidelity. Its weakness is the silence in the sand, the lack of proof that anyone ever built a city there. The search, therefore, becomes a choice about what kind of evidence we find most persuasive. Do we prioritize a philosophical reading, a known historical catastrophe, or a geographical riddle written in stone? Each path offers a different key to the same ancient lock. The power of this debate was transformed not by a new text or a fresh excavation, but by a simple shift in perspective from the ground to the stars. The Internet age, and specifically the advent of widely accessible satellite imagery, gave the Richat structure its global audience. For the first time, anyone with a computer could zoom in from the void of space and witness those perfect, haunting rings for themselves. Platforms like Google Earth democratized a view once reserved for astronauts and military analysts, placing a celestial map of the entire planet onto our screens. This was a revolution in how we see our own world. Suddenly, the most compelling evidence for the Atlantis connection was not a translated phrase or a disputed measurement, it was a photograph. The bird's eye view makes the concentric geometry of the Richat unmistakable and allows for an instant, visceral comparison with centuries of artistic renditions of Plato's circular city. With a few clicks, a viewer could overlay an artist's painting of Atlantis onto the satellite image and feel a genuine thrill of recognition. This visual shortcut bypassed complex academic arguments and spoke directly to our pattern-seeking minds. It fueled a surge of public interest and empowered a wave of amateur researchers, thinkers who could explore the hypothesis from their living rooms, free from the traditional gatekeepers of universities and institutes. For many, the image alone felt like proof, a truth revealed from the heavens. Yet, this very power carries a profound and inherent risk. The same technology that highlights the Richat's stunning form also amplifies our human tendency toward pareidolia, the psychological phenomenon of seeing meaningful shapes in random patterns. From the clouds, we see faces. In the Martian rocks, we might see a silhouette. The high-resolution, geometric clarity of the Richat's rings makes this tendency almost irresistible. The tool that allows for easy comparison also makes it dangerously easy to interpret every straight line or regular depression as a ruined wall, a canal, or a plaza, all without a single shard of pottery as corroboration. We are, in effect, map-reading a story onto the landscape, often mistaking the artistry of erosion for the handiwork of architects. This creates an environment where a compelling image can carry more weight than decades of sober, ground-level scientific analysis. The immediacy of the visual evidence can overshadow the silent testimony of what is not there, the absence of artifacts, middens, or foundations that would confirm a settlement. Technology gave the hypothesis its most powerful icon, but it also shortened the path from curiosity to conviction, sometimes leaping over the essential step of verification. It reminds us that while a view from space can reveal a breathtaking pattern, understanding its meaning still requires us, patiently and humbly, to walk the dusty earth below. This search for echoes leads us from the silent stones to the living tradition of stories. While no direct Mauritanian legend speaks of a sunken ringed city, the wider tapestry of West African folklore is rich with profound themes that feel hauntingly familiar. Across the region, there are enduring stories of great floods that reshaped the world, of bountiful lands that mysteriously faded away, and of ancestral migrations from a lost homeland. These are not precise histories, but rather archetypal narratives, the kind of deep cultural memories that form around major, traumatic events shared by a people. The Sahara's transformation from grassland to desert was exactly that kind of event, a slow-motion cataclysm that would have forced entire populations to abandon their homes and travel toward the Nile, the Niger, and the coast. It is within this dispersal that we might find a thread connecting landscape to legend. Could the story of a magnificent circular city, swallowed not by water but by sand, have traveled with those migrating groups over generations as the story moved farther from its source and was retold by cultures for whom the desert was an abstract threat? The consuming sands could have metaphorically become the consuming sea. A story that began as the loss of a green paradise might have evolved, through countless retellings across millennia, into the tale of an island paradise lost beneath the waves. This is the speculative but powerful realm of cultural memory. It suggests that the truth of a place might be preserved not in its specific coordinates, but in the emotional core of a story, one that carries the trauma of displacement and the nostalgia for a better world. The journey from the Sahara to Plato's Athens is long and winding, passing through the great cultural conduit of ancient Egypt. Egyptian mythology itself speaks of a primordial, perfect time called Zep-Tepi, the first time, and of cycles of creation and destruction. While their own records do not mention Atlantis, they were master archivists of history and myth, and they had direct contact with the peoples of the Sahara. It is entirely plausible that tales from the West of a great land that turned to dust entered the Egyptian consciousness. Centuries later, when the Greek statesman Solon visited Egypt, as Plato recounts, priests might have shared these ancient stories with him, stories already thousands of years old and filtered through an Egyptian worldview. By the time Plato wove them into his philosophical dialogues, the original setting, a desert in Africa, could have been completely transformed into an allegorical island in the Atlantic, a symbol perfectly suited for a Greek audience familiar with the sea's power. This line of inquiry moves us from geology to mythology, from proof to pattern. It asks us to consider stories as living artifacts, sometimes more durable than stone. The absence of a direct local myth about the Richat is not a refutation. It might simply mean the story evolved, its specific location forgotten but its essential drama preserved. We are left wondering if the true legacy of a place like the Richat is not in the ruins we might find, but in the ruins we imagine, in the universal human need to explain where we came from and how we lost our way. This brings the mystery inward from the desert to the human heart. A compelling case requires a compelling voice. Among the most dedicated modern champions of the Richat hypothesis is author and researcher Jimmy Bright. Through detailed videos and painstaking analyses, Bright has systematically built what many consider the most accessible and visually persuasive argument for the connection. His work, and that of others who share this view, does not rely on wild speculation but on a methodical re-examination of Plato's text against the physical and environmental canvas of Mauritania. They present their case not as fantasy but as a reasoned hypothesis, one that seeks to solve the ancient puzzle by aligning its pieces with a real-world location. To understand the full weight of this idea, we must listen carefully to the logic they propose. Their first and most powerful argument is, of course, the visual one. They contend that the concentric rings of the Richat are not merely a rough similarity, but a near-perfect match to the description of Atlantis's capital. For proponents, this is not a coincidence to be dismissed, but a clue to be investigated. It forms the foundation of everything that follows. The second pillar of their argument involves a flexible reinterpretation of Plato's geography and measurements. They suggest that the phrase "beyond the pillars of Hercules" could have signified the general, mysterious lands to the west of the Mediterranean world, not a specific nautical coordinate. The immense size Plato attributes to the island, larger than Libya and Asia combined, might be an exaggeration born of distant report or a misunderstanding of scale. When they apply the unit of the stadium to the Richat's rings, they often propose using a different, smaller value for the ancient measurement, one that brings Plato's numbers into closer alignment with the formation's actual dimensions. This recalibration is not seen as manipulation, but as a necessary adjustment for a story filtered through multiple cultures and languages. The third and perhaps most crucial element of their case is environmental context. They anchor the entire theory in the established science of the African humid period. A green Sahara transforms the Richat from an implausible desert ruin into a plausible site for a major settlement. In this lush past, the valleys between the rings could have held water, creating the literal moats Plato described. The central dome would have been a forested hill, rich with springs. This environmental stage makes the entire scenario feel tangible. The cataclysm that destroyed Atlantis, then, is reimagined not as a sudden seismic event, but as the relentless desertification that swallowed this green world, a disaster that would have seemed divinely ordained to those who lived through it. Proponents argue that this slow-moving catastrophe could easily be remembered and mythologized as a single, terrible day and night of destruction. The internal logic here is cohesive and emotionally resonant. It takes the mythic elements and seeks a natural, scientific explanation for each one, from the rings to the paradise to its end. The work of these researchers has performed an undeniable service, bringing global attention to a geological wonder and reinvigorating a timeless debate with fresh, visually stunning evidence. They have challenged us to see an old story on a new map, and in doing so, they have made the mystery feel alive again. For every compelling theory, there exists a rigorous counterargument, and the academic response to the Richat as Atlantis is both unified and formidable. Geologists stand on the most solid ground of all, pointing to the immutable timeline written in the rock itself. The process that formed the Richat's rings concluded tens of millions of years before the first humans walked the earth. To suggest a civilization built there is, in their view, like claiming someone constructed a city inside a dinosaur footprint while the creature was still alive. The formation is a closed geological book, its final chapters written in an era when our ancestors were small mammals scurrying underfoot. This is not a minor discrepancy. It is a fundamental impossibility that places the entire theory outside the realm of plausible history. Archaeologists echo this with evidence of a different kind, the evidence of absence. Decades of survey and study have yielded no trace of a complex, Bronze Age-level society at the site. There are no foundations, no metal artifacts, no pottery styles, no midden heaps filled with the debris of daily life. What we find are ancient, scattered stone tools from nomadic groups, a story of transient passage, not permanent glory. As one archaeologist specializing in the Sahara puts it, if a civilization of that scale had existed, we would be tripping over its remains. The silence from the sand is, in their professional judgment, deafening and conclusive. Classical historians add another layer of critique, focusing on the text itself. They argue that forcing Plato's Atlantis onto the Richat requires a selective and often contorted reading of his words. Plato was unequivocal about its location, an island in the Atlantic Ocean beyond the Pillars of Hercules. Relocating it to an inland desert formation, they contend, is not an interpretation. It is a replacement of the story's most basic geographic premise. Furthermore, they view the detailed dimensions and descriptions not as a surveyor's report, but as literary devices. The perfect rings and specific numbers served a philosophical purpose, illustrating ideals of harmony, order, and proportion central to Plato's worldview. To treat them as literal blueprints is to misunderstand the nature of his work. These scholars see the Richat hypothesis as a classic case of apophenia, the human tendency to perceive meaningful connections between unrelated things. The stunning visual pattern of the rings acts as a powerful lure, inviting us to project a story we already know onto a blank but fascinating canvas. The mind, desperate for narrative, connects the dots, even when the dots belong to entirely different pictures separated by millions of years. The most overarching objection is one of simplicity, often framed through the principle of Occam's razor. This principle suggests that among competing hypotheses, the one with the fewest assumptions should be selected. The established scientific explanation for the Richat is a symmetrical uplift eroded over eons, a well-understood geological process supported by extensive evidence. The Atlantis hypothesis, by contrast, requires a cascade of assumptions that Plato's date is wildly wrong, that his geography is metaphorical, that a vast civilization left no physical trace, and that a natural formation was mistaken for a built city. From this skeptical vantage point, the theory is not a breakthrough in historical understanding, but a captivating example of pseudoscience, where an appealing pattern is prioritized over methodological rigor and evidentiary standards. This critique is not offered out of disdain for mystery, but from a commitment to the careful, incremental work of understanding our past. It is a defense of the slow, often unglamorous process of building knowledge piece by verifiable piece. The Richat, in this light, remains profoundly significant, not as a lost capital, but as a testament to the planet's artistic power and a mirror reflecting our own endless desire to find lost worlds in the stones around us. The debate over the Richat ultimately hinges on a single, ancient choice. Was Plato writing history, or was he building a philosophical argument? To answer that, we must step back from the map and into the world of his ideas. The story of Atlantis does not appear in isolation. It is a crucial part of two dialogues, Timaeus and Critias, which together form a profound exploration of the cosmos, the state, and the human soul. In Timaeus, a character delivers a grand discourse on the creation of the universe, a work of natural philosophy. Then, in Critias, the same group turns to human history, and the tale of Atlantis is introduced as a contrasting example. This context is everything. The ideal city described earlier, a model of perfect justice and order, is represented by ancient Athens. Atlantis is crafted as its dramatic opposite, a mirror held up to show what happens when a great civilization abandons virtue for material power and conquest. From this perspective, Atlantis is not a lost place to be found, but a literary tool, a cautionary symbol of hubris. Scholars point to specific elements in the text that scream allegory. The civilization is said to be founded by the god Poseidon, a clear signal of its mythic, foundational status. Its size is described as larger than Libya and Asia combined, a geographical impossibility for an island in the Atlantic, suggesting a scale meant to convey overwhelming grandeur, not literal geography. The society is presented as initially perfect, then descending into corruption, a classic narrative arc about the fragility of human morality, and its destruction is framed as a divine punishment, a moral lesson delivered by the forces of nature. If we read the story this way, every detail serves the lesson. The perfect rings symbolize unnatural, engineered perfection. The abundance of resources represents temptation. The sudden cataclysm illustrates the inevitable collapse that follows moral decay. Searching for this city on a map, then, becomes a kind of category error. It is like trying to excavate the city from Aesop's fable of the ants and the grasshopper, looking for the tiny insect skeletons. The story's truth is not in its coordinates, but in its warning. This allegorical interpretation is elegant, intellectually satisfying, and supported by centuries of philosophical analysis. It explains why the story feels so vivid yet remains so elusive, because its purpose was to illuminate a truth about ourselves, not to document a ruin. For anyone drawn to the Richat theory, this is the most formidable intellectual obstacle to overcome. It forces a direct question. Are we projecting a literal history onto a story that was never meant to be one? The power of the Richat's visual echo is so strong that it can make us want to ignore this literary context, to treat Plato as a historian first and a philosopher second. Yet the allegorical reading cannot simply dismiss the eerie specificity of those rings, a detail that feels oddly precise for a purely invented parable. This leaves us at the fundamental fork in the road. One path leads inward into the human mind and its timeless stories about power and fall. The other leads outward across a desert in search of a place that might have inspired such a story. Your journey depends on which Plato you choose to follow. The search for Atlantis has never been confined to a single map. Across the centuries, the legend has been pinned to locations spanning the globe, each championed by passionate researchers who see their own compelling clues in Plato's text. One of the most academically respected candidates lies in the Aegean Sea. The island of Santorini, known in antiquity as Thera, is the remnant of a cataclysmic volcanic eruption around 3,600 years ago. This event devastated the sophisticated Minoan civilization on nearby Crete, with tsunamis and ash fall leading to widespread collapse. The evidence here is tangible, a verified historical disaster that fits the theme of a civilization lost in a single day and night. The flaw, however, is in the details. Thera is inside the Mediterranean, not beyond the Pillars of Hercules, and its geography does not match the concentric ringed city, though some suggest the caldera's shape inspired the tale. This theory trades a visual match for a solid historical anchor. Far out in the Atlantic, the Azores archipelago has long been proposed as the mountaintops of the sunken continent. Proponents point to underwater geological structures and ancient maps that seem to show islands in the mid-Atlantic. The core idea is that a landmass slowly subsided beneath the waves, fitting the literal sinking narrative perfectly. Yet, modern oceanography finds no evidence of a sunken continent in that region within the human time frame. The seafloor there is millions of years old, with no sudden, catastrophic subsidence in recent millennia. This hypothesis often relies on speculative interpretations of bathymetric data rather than concrete archaeological finds. Some have looked even farther west to places like the Bahamas and the Caribbean, citing unusual underwater formations like the Bimini Road as potential remnants of Atlantean harbors. These ideas capture the imagination with the romance of a tropical, advanced culture. The challenge is profound, however, as these locations lack any connection to the ancient Mediterranean world Plato described, and the supposed ruins are almost universally explained by natural geology. Perhaps the most extreme relocation places Atlantis in Antarctica, suggesting a shift in the Earth's crust moved a temperate continent to the South Pole. This idea hinges on fringe geological models and interprets ancient maps as showing an ice-free Antarctica. While inventive, it stands in direct opposition to all established understanding of plate tectonics and climate history, requiring a complete rewrite of planetary science. This brief tour reveals a colorful and contentious landscape. Every theory, including the Richat, must grapple with significant hurdles, whether it is chronology, geography, or a lack of physical proof. What sets the Richat apart in this crowded field is that one undeniable feature, the direct, stunning visual match to Plato's concentric rings. No other candidate on Earth offers that specific, iconic signature so clearly from the sky. This comparison does not prove the Richat is Atlantis, but it clarifies its unique appeal. It shows that the desire to pin this story to a real place is a powerful, persistent human impulse, a global phenomenon driven by our longing to transform myth into map. The Richat hypothesis, then, is not an outlier, but a particularly visually compelling entry in a centuries-old quest, one that asks us to weigh a spectacular pattern against the silent testimony of time and stone. The legend's power reaches beyond books and theories, touching the very ground it describes. For Mauritania, the Richat structure has become more than a geological marvel. It is now a beacon for a new kind of pilgrim. Travelers from across the globe make the arduous journey into the desert, not just to see the rings from space, but to stand within a story. They come with questions that science does not ask, hoping to feel the echo of a lost world beneath their feet. This influx of curiosity has created a delicate ripple effect in the local communities. Guiding services have emerged, offering multi-day expeditions across the trackless sand. For some, this represents a vital economic opportunity, a way to share their knowledge of the harsh, beautiful landscape with outsiders. The theory has, in a very real sense, put a remote corner of the Sahara on the map for thousands who would never have known it existed. Yet this attention presents a profound choice. Should the site be promoted primarily as the Eye of the Sahara, a stunning natural phenomenon with a deep planetary history, or is its appeal as a potential Atlantis more powerful, more capable of drawing visitors and their support? Mystery-based tourism can generate immediate interest, but it risks overshadowing the true, ancient story written in the rock. If visitors arrive expecting to find clear ruins and leave seeing only wind-swept stone, does that foster understanding or a kind of disappointment that the myth was not literally true? The challenge is to honor the sense of wonder that brings people there, while also sharing the richer, slower narrative of geology and climate change. This tension reflects a larger pattern in how we engage with the past. A compelling story like Atlantis can act as a gateway. It sparks an initial fascination that might lead someone to learn about plate tectonics, the African humid period, or the methods of archaeology. The public debate itself, with its back and forth between proponents and skeptics, can demonstrate the scientific process in real time, showing how ideas are tested against evidence. However, there is a shadow side to this dynamic. When a captivating theory is presented as being suppressed by a rigid academic establishment, it can sometimes feed a distrust of experts and institutions. The narrative can shift from a debate about evidence to a simpler story of brave outsiders versus closed-minded authorities. This overlooks the genuine excitement most scientists and historians feel for a good mystery, and their willingness to follow evidence wherever it leads, even if that evidence points to a natural wonder rather than a human one. The enduring conversation about the Richat and Atlantis, therefore, is about more than a place or a Plato. It is about our relationship with mystery in an age of information. It shows our deep need for narrative, for connection, for lost golden ages. It reveals how a landscape can become a canvas for our biggest questions. And it reminds us that sometimes the most valuable discovery is not a sunken city, but a deeper appreciation for the incredible planet we already inhabit, and the timeless human urge to find meaning in its shapes. So how do we move from speculation towards something resembling an answer? The path forward requires a bridge between open-minded curiosity and disciplined investigation, a framework that could, in principle, resolve a mystery like this. It begins not with grand pronouncements, but with quiet, meticulous tools. The first step would involve seeing beneath the surface without ever lifting a shovel. Ground-penetrating radar, or GPR, could be systematically deployed across the entire structure. This technology sends radar pulses into the Earth, creating a detailed image of what lies below. It could reveal the foundations of buildings, the outlines of ancient canals, or the patterns of buried streets. If a city once stood within those rings, GPR would likely detect its geometric footprint, its organized disruption of the natural soil layers. Finding nothing but undisturbed geology would be a powerful, though not definitive, piece of evidence against a large-scale settlement. Following any promising subsurface clues, the next phase would be careful, systematic excavation. This is not a treasure hunt, but a slow, grid-by-grid search for cultural material. Archaeologists would look for the unmistakable markers of complex human habitation, stratified layers containing pottery shards, metal fragments, tools, food remains, and evidence of structures. A single, well-documented excavation trench revealing a continuous layer of such artifacts, dated to the correct era, would revolutionize the entire discussion. Conversely, multiple excavations finding only natural sediment and ancient stone tools would build a compelling case for absence. To understand the environmental stage, scientists would turn to sediment cores. By extracting long cylinders of earth from the valleys between the rings, researchers could analyze pollen grains, microscopic charcoal, and soil composition layer by layer. This would paint a high-resolution picture of the past climate, revealing exactly when the area was green and lush and when it turned arid. It could also detect signs of human activity, like sudden increases in certain pollens from cultivated plants or layers of ash from sustained fires. This data would either corroborate the idea of a thriving community during the humid period or show that the environment, while wetter, showed no such intensive human signature. Alongside the physical search, a parallel investigation must happen with the ancient texts themselves. This requires a collaborative effort between historians, linguists, and archaeologists specializing in the classical world and North African history. They would scrutinize Plato's dialogues not for hidden codes but for cultural context. They would examine Egyptian records and West African oral traditions with fresh eyes, searching for any possible threads that might connect to a circular city or a great Western dispersal. This work is subtle, focusing on the transmission of stories and the evolution of geographic knowledge in the ancient world. The core principle guiding all this work is a simple but profound scientific truth. Proving a negative, proving that something never existed, is essentially impossible. You cannot dig everywhere. What rigorous methodology seeks is positive proof, unambiguous and verifiable evidence that can withstand the scrutiny of peer review. For the Richat to be accepted as a candidate for Atlantis or any lost civilization, it would need to yield that kind of evidence, artifacts in situ, structures with clear cultural origins, data that consistently points to a specific, advanced society. Without it, the theory remains an intriguing possibility, a hypothesis awaiting confirmation. This multidisciplinary approach is not about shutting down wonder, it is about channeling it. It respects the human drive to solve great mysteries while honoring the rigorous standards that prevent us from seeing mirages in the desert. It is a call for a partnership where the theorist's bold question meets the scientist's meticulous toolkit. Such a framework would not guarantee a magical discovery, but it would ensure that whatever we find or do not find leads us closer to a genuine understanding, transforming a captivating story into a chapter of our shared human history, however that chapter may ultimately read. That drive to uncover a hidden past speaks to something far deeper than simple curiosity. Our fascination with lost civilizations, with places like Atlantis, is rooted in fundamental parts of the human experience. It begins with a powerful sense of nostalgia, not for a time we personally knew, but for a golden age we feel we have collectively misplaced. This is the longing for a time when humanity was wiser, more connected, and lived in greater harmony with the world. Atlantis, in this light, is not just a city but a symbol of that lost potential. It represents a peak from which we have fallen, a reminder that our current state, with all its conflicts and complexities, might not be the only way. This narrative offers a comforting explanation for the imperfections of our world, suggesting they are the result of a great forgetting, not an inherent flaw in human nature. The story also provides a profound way to make sense of catastrophe. Natural disasters, climate shifts, and the collapse of societies are terrifying because they feel random and meaningless. By weaving these events into a legend of a civilization judged for its hubris, we impose a moral order onto chaos. The downfall of Atlantis is not a senseless tragedy, it is a lesson. It transforms a frightening force of nature into a narrative with purpose, a story that warns about the consequences of corruption and pride. This gives us a framework to understand loss, to find a reason within the ruin. Furthermore, the idea of a single, earth-shattering discovery that rewrites all the history books holds an irresistible thrill. It is the ultimate underdog story, where a lone researcher or a startling piece of evidence can overturn the consensus of centuries. This taps into our love for revelation and our suspicion that official narratives are incomplete. The possibility that scholars might have missed a lost empire in plain sight, visible from space no less, is exhilarating. It suggests that the world still holds monumental secrets and that we, the audience, might be witnessing the moment one is uncovered. This psychological backdrop is why the Richat theory resonates with such force, even when faced with strong scientific counterarguments. The evidence can be debated, but the emotional appeal is undeniable. Here is a real, breathtaking place that perfectly mirrors the central image of our most enduring lost world legend. It allows us to point to a map and say, there, that could be it. The theory satisfies our yearning for the golden age by giving it a potential address. It contextualizes the cataclysm not as a flood, but as a desert slowly claiming a green land, a disaster we can understand through climate science. And it embodies the thrill of the hidden truth, a secret hiding in the open for millennia. To understand this allure is to understand that the search for Atlantis is never just about archaeology or geology. It is a quest driven by our deepest stories about ourselves, our past, and our place in the universe. We are not merely looking for ruins, we are searching for a reflection of our own hopes, fears, and the enduring belief that a more perfect world once existed, and that its echo might still be found, waiting in the silent places of the earth. The cataclysm at the heart of the legend is its most vivid and terrifying image. Plato wrote of earthquakes and floods, of an entire island swallowed by the sea in one terrible day and night. This is the literal bedrock of the story, a maritime disaster. Yet if we are looking at a structure deep in the Sahara, we must confront a radical possibility. What if the sinking was never meant to be taken literally? What if it is a powerful metaphor for a different kind of vanishing? This is not about dismissing the story, but about listening to it more deeply, searching for the real-world catastrophe that could have felt like the end of the world to those who lived through it. The most compelling alternative is not a flood of water, but a flood of sand. We now know the Sahara underwent a dramatic transformation. The end of the African humid period was not a gentle drying. Climate models suggest it could have happened with startling speed, within just a few centuries or even less. For a civilization built around lakes and rivers, the change would have been apocalyptic. Wells would go dry, pastures would wither, and the relentless advance of dunes could literally bury outposts. To a society watching their green paradise turn to dust, it might indeed have felt as if the very earth was being swallowed, not by waves, but by a creeping, unstoppable desert. Their world was not submerged, it was desiccated, erased under a blanket of sand and forgetting. This environmental reinterpretation aligns perfectly with the location. Another possibility points to water, but of a sudden, catastrophic kind. During the humid period, vast lakes existed across the region. One theory suggests the collapse of a natural glacial dam or the catastrophic drainage of one of these mega lakes could have unleashed a titanic flash flood. Such an event would have been locally devastating, sweeping away everything in its path. For survivors downstream, the story of a great circular city destroyed by a wall of water in a single day could have been born, later merging with memories of the wider desertification. Or perhaps the disaster was more social than environmental. A complex society, stressed by changing climate and resources, could have collapsed from within through conflict, illness, or the breakdown of trade. To its people, the fall of their order, the abandonment of their capital, would have been a cultural cataclysm as profound as any earthquake. Their golden age would have ended, not with a geologic bang, but with the slow, painful whisper of dispersal and loss. Each of these scenarios offers a way to translate Plato's dramatic language. The phrase "sank into the sea" might be a later Greek interpretation of an older story about a land that vanished into the desert or was claimed by a great flood. As the tale traveled across cultures and millennia, the most relatable catastrophe for a seafaring people like the Greeks would naturally become a maritime one. This creative reinterpretation is not a weakness of the theory, but its necessary heart. It asks us to see myth not as a failed history book, but as a profound form of testimony. These stories often preserve the emotional truth of a disaster long after the specific details have blurred. The core memory is not of longitude and latitude, but of abundance lost, of a home that was here and then was gone, seemingly overnight. If the Richat was once a thriving center, its end, whether by drought, flood, or strife, would have generated exactly this kind of searing memory. The sands that now silence the site may have done more than bury a place. They may have transformed its real, terrestrial tragedy into the eternal, oceanic myth of Atlantis. This shift in perspective turns the desert from a contradiction into the very key to the mystery. The journey of a single story across such vast stretches of time is almost unimaginable. Think of a message whispered from one person to another in a long, winding chain. By the time it reaches the final listener, the words have inevitably changed. Now, stretch that simple game across thousands of years, across deserts and seas, between completely different languages and cultures. This is the crucible in which the Atlantis tale was forged, a process that transforms raw events into polished legend. Oral tradition is not a faulty recording device, it is a living, breathing entity. With each generation of storytellers, details are smoothed for better telling, numbers are rounded for dramatic effect, and unfamiliar elements are replaced with concepts the audience will understand. A great circular formation in a distant land might, over centuries, evolve in the telling from a natural wonder to a built metropolis. The science of memory shows us that our recollections are not static. Every time we recall an event, we subtly reshape it, influenced by our current knowledge and emotions. When a culture collectively remembers a traumatic event like the loss of a homeland, that memory consolidates around the most powerful symbols, the heart of the emotional truth, while peripheral details drift away or are reinvented. The visually stunning, perfectly circular Richat structure is exactly the kind of symbol that would anchor such a story. Its image is so distinctive, so geometrically perfect, that it would be virtually impossible to forget. A story that began as "we came from a land with great circular ridges near a dying lake" could, over 100 retellings, become "we came from a magnificent city of perfect rings built by the gods." The process is not one of deceit, but of meaning-making. As the story traveled from Saharan groups to perhaps the Garamantes or other North African cultures, and then into the keeping of Egyptian priests, each layer added its own cultural filter. Egyptian scribes, masters of geometry and monumental architecture, might have interpreted tales of rings as evidence of advanced engineering. By the time the Greek statesman Solon heard the story in the 6th century before the Common Era, it was already an ancient heirloom, its origins obscured by time. Plato, receiving it from Solon's notes, then crafted it into his philosophical narrative, likely refining the details to serve his lesson about the ideal state and its corruption. In this light, the contradictions we struggle with today become not errors, but expected artifacts of transmission. Plato's specific date of 9,600 years might have originated as a symbolic Egyptian phrase for deep antiquity. The description of the city sinking into the Atlantic Ocean could be a Greek interpretation of a much older story about a green land vanishing into the desert, or being claimed by a great inland sea that later dried up. The theory suggests we are not looking at a perfect historical match, but at a profound cultural echo. It proposes that the Richat, as a real and awe-inspiring place, served as the geographical heart for a legend about a great civilization that flourished in the Green Sahara and then was lost. The kernel of truth is the place itself and the trauma of a changing climate that displaced its people. The magnificent shell of concentric rings, divine founders, and a catastrophic sinking is the mythological elaboration, the beautiful, grand story that grew around that hard seed of memory. This perspective does not diminish the legend, it humanizes it. It shows how we, as a species, process loss and wonder, how we turn landscapes into legends and memories into monuments. The Richat, then, stands not as proof of a sunken city, but as a silent witness to the incredible, transformative power of the human story. This very silence, however, holds its own kind of promise. The Sahara is not merely an empty space, it is a colossal archive, and its primary preservation method is burial. For centuries, relentless winds have scoured the surface and deposited new layers, a slow, patient shroud of sand that can swallow entire landscapes. What if the key is not on the surface but beneath it? The absence of visible ruins does not definitively prove an absence of history. It may only prove the effectiveness of the desert as a keeper of secrets. Structures of mud brick or stone, if they existed, would not have crumbled into nothing. They would have been gradually inundated, protected from further erosion, and hidden from the naked eye. The possibility, however slim, remains that conclusive evidence lies dormant, waiting for the right technology or the right shift of the dune to reveal itself. Modern archaeology no longer relies solely on shovels and luck. Tools now exist that can peer into the earth without breaking its surface. Light detection and ranging, or LIDAR, uses laser pulses from aircraft to create incredibly detailed three-dimensional maps of the ground, capable of revealing subtle topographic anomalies like buried walls or plazas beneath forest canopies. In a desert environment with little vegetation, LIDAR could be exceptionally effective at identifying geometric patterns hidden under shallow sand. Similarly, advanced satellite spectroscopy analyzes the mineral composition of the Earth's surface from orbit. Different materials reflect light in unique signatures, and this technology can sometimes detect the chemical traces of ancient human activity, like areas of concentrated ash or altered soils, even when no physical structure is visible. A systematic, wide-area survey using these technologies could, in theory, scan the entire Richat Formation and its surroundings, creating a definitive subsurface map. Such a project would answer the question with authority, either revealing the ghostly footprints of a settlement or confirming a uniform, natural geology. Yet here we meet the sobering constraints of reality. The Richat structure is remote, vast, and logistically challenging. Organizing an aerial LIDAR survey or commissioning dedicated satellite time over such a large area requires significant funding, international cooperation, and governmental permissions. While the scientific value is clear, it must compete with countless other research priorities around the globe. Furthermore, even if an anomaly were detected, it would still require traditional, painstaking excavation to confirm its origin. A strange shape under the sand could be a geological fold as easily as a foundation. This balance between hope and practicality is where the mystery currently resides. We must be honest about the profound evidentiary void that exists today, while also acknowledging that the desert has not yet spoken its final word. The current silence is meaningful, but it is not necessarily eternal. This leaves us in a state of suspended wonder. The door to discovery is not slammed shut, it is merely heavy, awaiting the right combination of curiosity, technology, and resources to push it open. Until that day, the sands hold their secret close, and the rings continue their silent vigil. keeping the potential for revelation alive beneath a timeless, shifting sea of gold. Such a discovery would not simply add a new page to our history books, it would force us to rewrite the entire introduction. Our current narrative of civilization is a linear one, a story of gradual ascent. We trace a path from scattered hunter-gatherers to the first agricultural settlements in Mesopotamia and the Nile Valley, then onward to the great empires of the Bronze Age. This timeline is orderly, progressive, and comfortably fits within the last 10,000 years. But what if that path is not a single road but a network of trails, some of which faded long before we began to map them? Evidence of a sophisticated culture at the Richat 12,000 years ago would shatter the assumption that complex society had only one cradle. It would suggest that the spark of civilization, of large-scale cooperation, monumental architecture, and advanced knowledge could ignite independently in different corners of the globe under different skies and at different times. We would have to confront the possibility of a precursor culture, a foundational chapter of human achievement that flourished and then was lost, its legacy perhaps flowing into the river valleys we know, or vanishing entirely beneath the sands. This would transform human history from a steady climb to a story with forgotten peaks, reminding us that progress is not a guarantee, but a fragile, recurring possibility. The implications would ripple far beyond archaeology, reaching into the very way we listen to ancient voices. For generations, stories like Platos' Atlantis have been categorized as myth, as allegory, or as pure invention. They are the stories we tell before history begins, but if such a tale were anchored to a real, verifiable place, it would force a radical reassessment of oral tradition. It would suggest that these narratives are not mere fables, but could be vessels of deep time memory, carrying the core truth of catastrophic events and lost homelands across hundreds of generations. The human capacity for story would be revealed not just as a tool for entertainment or moral instruction, but as a sophisticated technology for preserving history across millennia. We would have to look at other enduring legends, from global flood myths to tales of sunken lands, with new respect, wondering what other forgotten truths might be encoded in their symbols. This validation would blur the hard line we draw between myth and history, showing them to be intertwined strands of the same human thread. Ultimately, this thought experiment is less about a place in the desert and more about our place in time. It confronts the profound fragility of human knowledge. A civilization, no matter how grand, can be so completely erased by environmental change or social collapse that its very existence becomes a subject of debate millennia later. Our own modern world, with its digital records and global networks, can feel permanent, yet the silent rings of the Richat whisper a humbling counterpoint. They ask what of our own achievements would survive a similar cataclysm, and what stories might distant descendants tell about us. The enduring allure of Atlantis, therefore, taps into a deep-seated awareness of our own impermanence. It is a mirror held up to our civilization, reflecting both our awe at what we can build and our anxiety that it, too, might one day become just a story, a puzzling pattern on a map, waiting for someone to ask the right question. The internet is a powerful amplifier for both discovery and distortion. As the Richat theory gained traction, a parallel wave of exaggerated claims began to circulate, muddying the waters between intriguing possibility and outright fiction. One persistent myth suggests that advanced underwater scans of the structure have revealed submerged pyramids or geometric ruins. The truth is far simpler and in its own way more profound. The Richat structure is not underwater. It sits over 250 meters above sea level. No credible sonar or bathymetric survey has ever been conducted there for the simple reason that there is no body of water to scan. This claim often relies on mislabeled images from entirely different locations, perhaps sunken formations off coastlines, presented as evidence from the eye of the Sahara. It is a classic case of digital misinformation, where an arresting image is detached from its real context to support a narrative. Another common error involves photographs. You might see dramatic pictures of massive, crumbling stone blocks arranged in straight lines, captioned as the ancient walls of Atlantis at the Richat. In almost every case, these are photos from known archaeological sites elsewhere in the world, like the Inca ruins at Sacsayhuaman in Peru or the megalithic structures at Ollantaytambo. Their imposing, precise masonry is awe-inspiring, but it belongs to a different continent and a different chapter of human history. Using them as evidence for the Richat is not just incorrect, it inadvertently steals from the genuine marvels of other cultures. Even when looking at genuine satellite imagery of the Richat itself, our pattern-seeking brains can run wild. Linear ridges formed by the erosion of a hard rock layer can appear from above as perfectly straight roads or canals. Circular depressions might look like the foundations of round buildings. To the untrained eye, these features can seem deliberately engineered. Geologists, however, can explain each one as a natural process. The straight lines are the exposed edges of dipping sedimentary layers. The circular features are often remnants of volcanic plugs or the results of differential weathering. This is not to dismiss curiosity, but to ground it in the established language of the land. These clarifications are not meant to shut down wonder, but to refine it. By separating the demonstrable facts from the viral fictions, we clear the space for a more honest conversation. The real mystery of the Richat is compelling enough. It does not need invented pyramids or borrowed walls. Its power lies in its authentic, breathtaking form and the genuine, unanswered questions about whether human memory could have preserved its image across millennia. Correcting these exaggerations builds a stronger foundation for the theory's legitimate points, ensuring that our fascination is rooted in what is truly there, not in what we might wish to see. The moment of truth arrives not with a single clue, but with their collective weight. To navigate this dense thicket of arguments, imagine a simple scorecard, a way to tally the evidence for and against the Richat as Atlantis. On one side, the points in favor begin with the theory's most undeniable strength. The visual match of the concentric rings is unparalleled. No other location on Earth presents such a precise, iconic echo of Plato's central city blueprint. It is a geographical coincidence so striking it demands an explanation. Next, the environmental context of the Green Sahara provides a crucial stage. It transforms the site from an impossible desert ruin into a plausible, even likely, hub for a flourishing prehistoric culture during a lush, water-rich era. Finally, its location in Mauritania sits in a general westward direction from Egypt, the alleged source of Solon's story, fitting a broad interpretation of lands beyond the known world. These points together form a compelling narrative of a real place that could have inspired a legendary tale. The opposing side, however, presents hurdles that are equally substantial. The chronological disconnect is profound. Plato's date places Atlantis over 11,000 years in the past, while the Richat's geological formation concluded tens of millions of years earlier. Bridging this gap requires significant reinterpretation of the text. Then comes the evidential silence, the complete lack of archaeological ruins. After extensive surveys, no foundations, artifacts, or middens of an advanced Bronze Age society have been found, only traces of much older nomadic life. The location itself contradicts the story's core geography, an inland desert formation versus an island in the Atlantic beyond the Pillars of Hercules. And overarching all of this is the powerful argument from classical scholars that Plato's tale is fundamentally allegorical, a philosophical parable never intended as literal history. Each of these points stands as a major pillar of mainstream scientific and historical consensus. Weighing this scorecard is less about simple addition and more about understanding the nature of the evidence itself. The points for the theory are often evocative, contextual, and interpretative. They build a plausible and emotionally resonant scenario. The points against it are frequently concrete, empirical, and rooted in established disciplines like geology, archaeology, and philology. They demand verifiable proof that has not yet materialized. The visual match is spectacular, but can a pattern alone, however perfect, outweigh the absence of physical proof and a direct conflict with the timeline? The green Sahara context is scientifically valid, but does it confirm a specific city, or merely confirm that people could have lived there? The theory's great strength is its ability to weave a compelling story from these pieces. Its great weakness is that the story remains just that, a narrative woven around a natural wonder, awaiting the tangible, discovered object that could anchor it to history. This synthesis does not hand you an answer. Instead, it offers you the framework. You must decide which column carries more weight, whether the power of a story rooted in a place is enough, or whether the silent testimony of the stones and the text must be taken literally. Your verdict rests on what you believe is more likely, that a breathtaking natural formation became the immortal heart of a myth, or that a myth has been waiting all this time for us to recognize its true, sun-baked address. Our journey ends where it began, with a story. From the sunlit courtyards of ancient Athens to the silent, sun-baked rings of the Sahara, we have followed a trail of questions across continents and millennia. The Richat structure stands undeniable, a masterpiece of planetary artistry that mirrors the legend's central image with an almost supernatural fidelity. It is a coincidence so precise, so visually arresting, that it feels less like chance and more like a riddle deliberately etched into the earth. This resemblance does not simply invite curiosity, it commands it, pulling us across deserts of doubt in search of an answer. Yet, after sifting through the layers of evidence, from the immutable timeline of the rocks to the silent testimony of the sand, a clear picture emerges through the heat haze. The scientific consensus is firm and founded on decades of observation. The Richat is a profoundly beautiful geological formation, the result of symmetrical uplift and eons of patient erosion. It is not the ruins of a sunken capital. The evidence for a lost civilization here is ultimately a compelling story in search of proof that has never materialized. So does this mean the search was in vain? Not at all. The true value of this exploration may lie not in a definitive discovery, but in the journey itself. This mystery forces us to confront deeper questions about the nature of history and story. How do we distinguish between a literal record and a profound allegory? How does a real place weathered by climate catastrophe become the seed for a myth about an island swallowed by the sea? Our fascination with lost worlds like Atlantis speaks to a fundamental human longing, a nostalgia for a golden age that may say more about our hopes and anxieties than about our past. Perhaps Atlantis was never meant to be a dot on a map. Perhaps it is, and always has been, a mirror. It reflects our awe at the rise and fall of civilizations, our fear of environmental cataclysm, and our timeless desire to believe that greatness once existed, even if it was lost. The Richat structure, in all its majestic solitude, serves as the perfect focal point for that reflection. It is a real wonder that inspires legendary wonder. So the next time you look at a satellite image of that perfect, lonely eye in the desert, remember that you are not just looking at rocks. You are gazing at a canvas upon which humanity has projected one of its oldest and most enduring dreams. The adventure was never about uncovering a single truth, but about rediscovering our own capacity for awe. If this journey through time and sand has sparked your curiosity, share your own perspective in the comments below. Do you see a geological marvel or the ghost of a story waiting to be told? Subscribe for more explorations into the borders where history and mystery meet. And wherever your own searches take you, remember this: the greatest discoveries often begin not with an answer, but with a question that refuses to let go.